I've sort of argued before that, the Ukraine war appears, well, I wrote a piece about it. Ukraine, that whole conflict appears to have been instigated by the CIA. And it was, not that long after the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. And of course, U.S. entry into Afghanistan was intimately linked to the CIA. And so losing Afghanistan is sort of this black hole for, black budget money and also, opium, heroin trafficking, among other things. You sort of have that same black budget hole open up when Ukraine starts, and a lot of weird things go on. So, I mean, there's some interesting things that I think went into the genesis of the Ukraine conflict.
Conflicts are rarely as spontaneous as they seem, and the situation in Ukraine is no exception. While global headlines focus on Russian aggression and the country's defiant resistance, there is another, more complex narrative lurking beneath the surface. Investigative journalist Whitney Webb highlights the role of the CIA in shaping the course of events. Known for its covert operations and influence, the agency has a history of shaping geopolitical landscapes, including its involvement in Afghanistan. After the U.S. withdrawal, the void left behind seemed to be filled by new conflicts, and suddenly, Ukraine became a key point of focus. Webb suggests that the unfolding crisis in Ukraine may not be as coincidental as it appears. The timing and the pattern of events closely resemble those of previous conflicts, marked by arms deals, financial operations, and intelligence maneuvers that thrive in turbulent environments. With Ukraine now emerging as a new hotspot for military spending and shadow operations, Webb points to the unsettling consistency of these cycles. It's as though the machinery driving these conflicts continues to function, with far-reaching consequences, regardless of the human cost. So was this really about defending democracy, or was it about filling a power vacuum, propping up a lucrative industry of destruction, and ensuring that the right people kept getting paid? The answer might be buried deeper than the mainstream is willing to dig. Let's watch more clips from Whitney Webb's explosive interview to gain more insight. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for additional in-depth content. Thanks for joining us again. Enjoy the video.
While it is true that USAID or USAID is an intelligence cutout that has engaged in financing regime change and other terrible things, I feel like the independent media focus on USAID being quote-unquote dismantled, it is actually going to be rehoused at the Rubio-run State Department, is distracting us from the fact that Musk, who is trying to turn SX into the everything app that he wants to run more than half of the U.S. financial system and which is launching payment rails this year, just gained access to Americans' private banking information via the Treasury payment system. The Everything app model, embodied by the infamous WeChat, is effectively a public-private app used to surveil people's communications and financial activity with often Orwellian consequences. USAID absolutely sucks, but we also need to keep our eye on the ball as big tech oligarchs beget techno-tyranny, and will do so very easily if we fail to scrutinize them and pay attention to the things they are openly building. Musk in his new role does not have to divest from any business interests, including X, and can easily use the Department of Government Efficiency or Doge or other means to fulfill his Everything app desires and kingmake companies which he owns or controls or in which he is deeply invested. As I understand it, the narrative around Doge has been extremely polarizing. I haven't been on Twitter much since I issued off that tweet, but people said that USAID, including Musk and Trump, that USAID was going to be completely shut down. No, it was rehoused at the Rubio-run State Department. People claimed that this would somehow mean that the era of USAID and, these style intelligence, cutouts like USAID or the National Endowment for Democracy would somehow stop doing the bad things that they have been known to do in the past, and that their efforts to cultivate regime change would stop. There's no reason to think that will happen. First of all, the National Endowment for Democracy does the same type of stuff like USAID. It has not been defunded, and it openly, according to its co-founder in the early 90s, said, "We do what the CIA used to do a few years ago." So, they continue to engage in those kinds of activities, and USAID had been outed in the past year and a half or so in particular for engaging in these kind of shady activities. Generally, when some sort of intelligence cutout or front is overly exposed, they just move it to they either privatize it and move it into the private sector, or they reshuffle it into different agencies. So, Marco Rubio running the State Department is a very big advocate of regime change in a variety of countries, especially Latin America, and has in the past been very, I don't know really the best word, been extremely pro-US aid, I guess. Very supportive of the US government giving US aid a lot of money in targeting Venezuela, for example, and Cuba, other countries in Latin America. Very supportive of that. And also, Musk himself, who was saying US aid is bad in this, is kind of became infamous, though, of course, a lot of people have forgotten this, that during that, the coup in Bolivia a few years ago, he said, "We will coup whoever we want, deal with it," on Twitter. And there was a lot of rumors that a lot of the reasoning behind that coup was because of Bolivia's extensive lithium reserves, which his company Tesla is very interested in. And the previous Bolivian government under Evo Morales had entered into joint ventures with Chinese state-owned firms for the purpose of exploiting that lithium. And then under the coup government, it moved to efforts were made to exploit that with U.S., joint ventures with U.S. companies, right? So to think that regime change will suddenly stop because these people are calling the shots, right. There isn't really a lot of evidence for that at all. And the State Department itself has engaged in regime change. There's numerous occasions. Probably the best known is Henry Kissinger, when he was head of the State Department, helping plan the coup in Chile in 1973 with the CIA. This is something that has been going on a very long time. The State Department and the CIA have a documented, very symbiotic relationship. If you look at what happened over the course of the Ukraine conflict with respect to just Ukraine itself, basically U.S. multinational corporations took over the entire country. Its reconstruction fund is run by BlackRock and JP Morgan. Its major aspects of its government were taken over by Microsoft and U.S. Silicon Valley companies. Its military became dominated by Peter Thiel-linked companies like Palantir and Anduril. And Clearview AI. And a lot of these companies that are now seeing an ascendance or an increase in contracts under the Trump administration. Of course, Elon Musk's, Starlink was also involved with the Ukrainian military. And now Ukraine is pretty much entirely dependent on these U.S. multinational companies. And a lot of them have ties to the Trump administration. So, if you're the Trump administration, peacetime allows the rebuilding that these companies will control to continue. So, those companies would not have made those investments and taken those chunks of, the Ukrainian state or military, or, its reconstruction plans if they didn't anticipate that at some point they'd be able to generate an extensive return on investment, right? And so by going into peacetime, allowing peacetime to happen or engineering it, you're allowed to basically, capitalize on that. And it seems like the end result is just going to be Ukraine being a de facto U.S. colony at the end of the day. So I would argue that, the interest in peace with Ukraine is really an economic interest related to these companies. And this is something that spans, obviously both the Biden and Trump administrations. It's not, obviously exclusive to one or the other. And in the case of, the Trump administration, the first time, I think it was pretty clear that he helped, expand U.S. involvement in Yemen and was very open to using U.S. military assets and U.S. funding to further Israeli regional ambitions in the Middle East. So now that the Gaza conflict has been going on, it really shouldn't surprise anyone that Trump has been so interested really in facilitating that beyond even what the Biden administration facilitated. Yeah, I mean, Trump's whole foreign policy approach is like, oh, I'm the deal maker, the whole art of the deal thing. And generally the deals that Trump makes are either with state leaders or they're with billionaires, right? For, this billionaire announced massive investment in this and that, or I negotiated this with this state leader, The Palestinians have minimal state representation and minimal economic power in that sense. So obviously Trump is going to be extremely disinterested in them.
Right.
According to Whitney Webb, the U.S. doesn't ditch regime change, it just rebrands it. USAID's dirty dealings didn't disappear, they simply relocated to Rubio's State Department. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is cooking up an app that gives him direct access to your bank data, a WeChat-style surveillance monster. From Bolivia's lithium heist to Ukraine's corporate takeover by BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Musk's Starlink, the game remains the same. Create chaos, then privatize the power. The players change, but the grift rolls on. Follow the money, it always spills the truth. Trump's ties to power run darker than most realize. His rise was funded by shadowy elites, from mob-linked Resorts International to Epstein's yacht, and a Rothschild bailout that kept his empire afloat. Wilbur Ross, working at Rothschild Inc., pulled off the financial rescue and got a cabinet seat in return. These same backers have deep ties to Israel, explaining Trump's unwavering loyalty. As his bankers once said, "We bet on the Trump brand." Now, as a political player, he's cashing in on those favors. The ultimate insider playing the outsider game. Let's watch more clips from the interview.
But you could also argue that, Trump is kind of beholden to certain economic interests going back to his time before he was president. So for example, since we were talking about the mob earlier, he took over one of the most notorious mob and CIA linked companies ever in the 1980s, Resorts International, formerly the Mary Carter Paint Company, after its longtime head, James Crosby, died. In that same era, he buys Adnan Khashoggi's yacht. He's partying with Epstein. He's on Robert Maxwell's yacht. He's very in this particular sphere. His mentor is Roy Cohn, a longtime mob lawyer, and as I note in my book, alleged sex blackmailer with really extensive organized crime connections. And so, around the time that he was hanging out on Robert Maxwell's yacht, Robert Maxwell was acting, and this is admitted by the New York Times at the time, was acting as a frontman for Rothschild Inc., which was basically this Wall Street entity that was created by the Rothschild family to strengthen their foothold in Wall Street. And they focused mainly on mergers and acquisitions. And so, Maxwell died in 1991. And then around that same time, those same banking interests bailed out Trump. And Wilbur Ross was working for N.M. Rothschild at the time and helped orchestrate that bailout of Trump. And then Trump was largely seen as having honored that by making Wilbur Ross Commerce Secretary in his first term. But basically, Trump as a business figure wouldn't be around if it wasn't for that assistance at that point in time. And obviously, that particular banking dynasty has a long and storied history with the state of Israel. I mean, that's just a verifiable fact. So it's very possible that he continues to honor that assistance to his family's business empire as president. It's definitely not outside of the realm of possibility. And it's also worth noting that, the bankers involved in that were interviewed at the time about why they bailed out Trump, since for them, it didn't make any economic sense. And they said, sure, his businesses are a mess. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the Trump brand is what's valuable. The Trump name is what's valuable. So these particular banking interests saw him as a figure, as a brand, as something that they could utilize in the future.
The Trump administration has been quietly strong-arming nations into adopting Elon Musk's Starlink satellite internet, leveraging trade negotiations and tariffs to secure regulatory approvals, according to a Washington Post investigation. Just weeks after President Trump imposed steep tariffs on Lesotho, the small African nation granted Starlink a 10-year license, a move an internal State Department memo framed as demonstrating goodwill ahead of trade talks. Similar fast-tracking has occurred in India, Somalia, Pakistan, and beyond, with U.S. embassies aggressively pushing Starlink as Chinese competitors loom. As Whitney Webb has extensively documented, Musk's ventures often blur the lines between private enterprise and state power. The Biden administration has also pressured countries to adopt Starlink, framing it as a patriotic alternative to Chinese telecoms. But critics see a pattern of coercion, tying trade policy to the expansion of a billionaire's empire. While the White House denies explicit quid pro quos, the timing is suspect. Nations facing U.S. tariffs suddenly expedite Starlink approvals, and Musk's global monopoly grows. State Department officials, including Marco Rubio, have openly advocated for Starlink, calling it a game changer. Yet the unspoken truth is clear. Whether under Trump or Biden, U.S. foreign policy increasingly serves Silicon Valley's interests, with Musk positioned as both beneficiary and enforcer. As Webb's reporting suggests, when governments and oligarchs align, the public rarely wins. The question isn't just about internet access, it's about who pulls the strings behind the next phase of digital colonialism. As we wrap up, do you think the U.S. government has become a middleman for corporate power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video and hit the like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.